Before you do that, oh, never mind. It's okay.
You can remember, write it down.
I will. I will.
So we are still in Joshua. Joshua is the first book of the history section of the Bible. And I was going to look something up. Give me 1 second here. So yeah, so Joshua was the first book of the history history section, probably written between around 1400 BC. So we were talking about when, and that's an important number, and that's not one I'm going to have you memorize, like 586 BC, but 1400 BC would be roughly when the Israelites entered into the promised land, or just before that, because this probably was written after that, right? So within 100 years before that. And then if we go backwards from there, how long were they wandering in the desert, so on and so forth, you know, and some of the other events of the Old Testament. So we are in chapter 9 in Joshua. The next, I don't think we'll read it all right now, but then we get further in Joshua, we start to get there's some list of names and rulers and stuff. There's a lot of,
My goodness, yeah.
Place names and stuff. There's a whole chapter with the towns of Judah, which is interesting. But we have a couple interesting stories before we get there. We're going to have 3 or 4 chapters of just lists pretty soon. But the Gibeonites saved themselves by trickery. Now, when all the kings who were beyond the Jordan in the hill country and in the lowland all along the coast of the Great Sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, and the Jebusites heard of this. They gathered together with one accord to fight Joshua and Israel. So so what was going on before was Joshua was raging war against, as we remember last week, AI, and Jericho, and all the other people in the other lands around are seeing what's going on, and they're a little concerned that Joshua was going to come for them next. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning. They went and prepared provisions and took worn-out sacks for their donkeys, and wineskins worn out and torn and mended, with worn-out pat sandals on their feet and worn-out clothes, and all their provisions were dry and moldy. That sounds like an interesting preparation. They went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the Israelites, "We have come from a far country, so now make a treaty with us." But the Israelites said to the Hivites, "Perhaps you live among us, and how can we make a treaty with you?" They said to Joshua, "We are your servants." And Joshua said to them, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" They said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country because of the name of the Lord your God. We have heard a report of him, of all that he did in Egypt, and of all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond Jordan, King Sihon of Heshbon and King Og of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, 'Take provisions in your hand for the journey. Go to meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Come now and make a treaty with us. Here is our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food on the journey. On the day we set out to come to you, but now see, it is dry and moldy. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and see, they are burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey.' So the leaders partook of their provisions and did not ask direction from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, guaranteeing their lives by a treaty, and the leaders of the congregation swore an oath to them. That's sneaky. They weren't that far away, but they made it seem like they were far away. But when 3 days had passed after they made a treaty with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and were living among them. So the Israelites set out and reached their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Chephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. The Israelites had not attacked them because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders, but all the leaders said to all the congregation, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we must not touch them. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that wrath may not come upon us because of the oath that we swore to them. The leaders said to them, let them live. So they became hewers of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, as the leaders had decided concerning them. Joshua summoned them and said to them, why did you deceive us, saying we are very far from you, while in fact you are living among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall always be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. They answered Joshua, because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. So we were in great fear for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now we are in your hand. Do as it seems good and right in your sight to do to us. This is what he did for them. He saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. But on that day, Joshua made them hewers of wood and drawers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord, to continue to this day in a place that he should choose. They don't die, but they're slaves, I guess.
But the main thing is the Israelites didn't ask God's direction on it.
Right. Right. I'm looking among the notes here. Gibeon is 6 miles north of Jerusalem.
Hmm,
It was that close.
yeah.
This is interesting. My book says that, worship at the tabernacle and later at the temple required much wood and water for sacrifices and washing, and consequently a great deal of menial labor. From now on, that labor was supplied by the Gibeonites, perhaps on a rotating basis. In this way, they entered the Lord's service. When Solomon became king, the tabernacle and altar were at Gibeon.
Oh,
Wow.
So that's interesting, that it kind of.
They became tangentially servants of God, that they, yeah.
Right, yeah.
That was their inheritance in a way. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, I guess that was better than getting wiped out.
Right.
Yeah. Huh.
And that's what they said, right? They said,
Yeah.
well, we heard that you're going to get rid of all the people that occupy the land, and we didn't want to be killed. So, and remember, Joshua just destroyed 2 cities, like right before this, right? So, one by marching around it till the walls fell.
He was pretty tricky.
Chapter 10. When King Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, doing Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he became greatly frightened, because Gibeon was a large city, like one of the royal cities, and was larger than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So King Adoni-Zedek of Jerusalem sent a message to King Hoham of Hebron, to King Piram of Jarmuth, to King Jaffa of Lachish, and to King Debir of Eglon, saying, come up and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and the Israelites. Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all the armies and camped against Gibeon and made war against it. And the Gibeonites sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, do not abandon your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who live in the hill country are gathered against us. So Joshua went up from Gilgal, and he and all the fighting force with him, all the mighty warriors. The Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I've handed them over to you. Not one of them shall stand before you. So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who inflicted a great slaughter on them at Gibeon, chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth Horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel while they were going down the slope of Beth Horon, the Lord threw down great stones from heaven on them as far as Esagah. Ow. And they died. And there was more who died because of the hailstones than the Israelites killed with the sword.
Hmm.
That's a different kind of hailstone that I'm used to.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, I don't know. There could be we've had some pretty big ones here, like the kind that come through your roof.
Yeah. On the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the Israelites, Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Aijalon. And the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jashar? The sun stopped in mid-heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. There's been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded a human voice, but the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua turned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. I'm curious about the book of Jahar. The book of Jahar is mentioned in 2 Samuel. This is my other thought, that it's interesting that Jerusalem becomes the holy city of the people later on, when right now it is a foreign. It was built by by non-Israelites originally. I guess I never realized that.
I didn't either. I always thought Jerusalem was their city that they built. So
It apparently was an Amorite city before it was an Israelite city. Yeah.
Huh.
And I've read these books, but that struck me as, because Jerusalem then becomes, of course, the one of the holy city for Christianity and Judaism, but also for Islam. I mean, it's a very important in those ways. Yeah.
The trouble with reading this kind of stuff, if you don't know who these people are or where these places are, it's like talking to someone that is telling you about someone else that you have no clue about.
Yeah.
I have a friend that does that all the time to me. And I'm going, now, who are you talking about? That's kind of how this is. It's, going, wow, who are these men? We know where Jerusalem is, and Gilgal, but other than that,
For the most part, these places are south of Jerusalem, south of where Jericho. Jericho is actually pretty close to Jerusalem, but they're mostly toward the south. For the most part, the Israelites are mostly to the north. So that's a bit of an oversimplification, but for the most part, that's what's going on. Yeah.
Well, I have and I think Betty Lou has this book too. It has the maps in the back of it,
Yeah,
which is
mine
really kind of cool because it gives you the Exodus and conquest of Canaan,
Yep.
and which is pretty much kind of where we're at right now, right? So
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the names are, but then a lot of them aren't too.
Well, is a settlement. Well, I have lots of maps. One is settlement in Canaan and the tribal areas. That's probably, yeah. So you can see some of the Hebron, which was mentioned, Lachish, which was mentioned, Eglon, which was mentioned. They're all south of Jerusalem, of those kings, right? So for the most part, those places are south.
Right, there they are. Yeah, kind of more towards the coast, right?
Hebron is less, but yeah. So that's three of them: Eglon, Lachish, and Eglon, Lachish, and Hebron. I think they're all south of Jerusalem. For the most, according to what we read earlier in Joshua and the end of the Torah, they sort of came across the Jordan in the middle. So they haven't gone to the north and they haven't gone to the south. So you kind of see where the Jordan is not a little, like you see where Gilgal is, a little, but where kind of where Gilgal and Jericho are, and Ai, they're all a little bit north of Jerusalem. That's where they crossed into the promised land. So, yeah. Okay. If you have a map, if you don't have a map, you're just wondering what we're talking about.
Okay. I like maps. Maps are cool.
We're going to continue on verse 16 of chapter 10. Meanwhile, these 5 kings fled and hid themselves in a cave at Makkedah. Well, since we have the map open, where's Makkedah? Is it in there? Probably not. Anyway. And it was told Joshua, the 5 kings have been found hidden in a cave at Makkedah. Joshua said, roll large stone against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them. But do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack them from the rear. Do not let them enter the towns, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the Israelites had finished inflicting a very great slaughter on them until they were wiped out, and when the survivors had entered into the fortified towns, all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. No one dared speak against any of the Israelites. And Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out to me from the cave. They did so and brought the 5 kings out to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. When they brought the kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the Israelites and said to the chiefs of the warriors who had gone with him, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Wow. And they came near and put their feet on their necks. And Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all the enemies against whom you fight. Afterwards, Joshua struck them down and put them to death. And he hung them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees until evening. At sunset, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. They set large stones against the mouth of the cave, which remains to this very day. Joshua took Makkedah on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He utterly destroyed every person in it. He left no one remaining. And he did to the king of Makkedah as he had done to the king of Jericho. Then Joshua passed on from Makkedah and all Israel with him to Libnah and fought against Libnah. I need to look at my map again. Where's Libnah? Oh, okay. In that same area to the south, not far from Eglon and Lachish.
Right.
The Lord gave it to him also in the king of the hand of Israel, and he struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it. He left no one remaining in it, and he did to its king as he had done to the king of Jericho. Oh, next Joshua passed on from Libnah and all Israel with him to Lachish, and they had seized on it and assaulted it. The Lord gave Lachish into the hand of Israel, and he took it on the 2nd day and struck it with the edge of the sword and every person in it as he had done to Libnah. Then King Horam of Gezer came up to help Lachish, and Joshua struck him and his people, leaving him no survivors. From Lachish, Joshua passed on with all Israel to Eglon, and they laid siege to it and assaulted it, and they took it that day and struck it with the edge of the sword, and every person in it he utterly destroyed that day as he had done to Lachish. Then Joshua went up with all Israel from Eglon to Hebron. They assaulted it and took it and struck it with the edge of the sword and its king and its towns, and every person in it. He left no one remaining, just as he had done to Eglon, and utterly destroyed it with every person in it. Then Joshua with all Israel turned back to Debir and assaulted it, and he took with its king and all his towns. They struck them with the edge of the sword and utterly destroyed every person in it. He left no one remaining, just as he had done to Hebron, and he did to Libnah and its king. He did to Debir and its king. So Joshua defeated the whole land, the hill country and the Negeb, and the lowland and the slopes, and all their kings. He left no one remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as Lord God of Israel commanded. And Joshua defeated them from Kadesh Barnea to Gaza and all the country of the Goshen as far as the Gibeon. Joshua took all these kings in their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. And Joshua turned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. So reading this as historical, that's a pretty big area now.
Mhm.
From Gilgal and Bethel in the north down to Hebron. Debir, you mentioned, in the south. Debir is pretty, that's becoming a pretty big area now,
Mhm.
if you have a map. Judy may not have a map, but I'm gonna show you. From here to here, between my fingers, that whole area,
Yeah,
basically. That's
definitely.
roughly modern day Israel, right? And that's like a third of modern day Israel.
Hmm.
That is, there's people down here, Debir and Lakshan and stuff are down here. Jericho and Ai and Gilgal are up here. Jerusalem is about here. So yeah. Gives you an idea anyway.
Yeah.
I have to say that I mean, I know I'm reading this with a modern lens, but I've never felt super comfortable with this whole idea. Well, let's just kill everybody because God commanded it.
Yeah. It's awful.
Mhm.
When I think of our world today and the way we fight country against country and the horrors of war,
Yeah.
just as soon not hear it.
Yeah, it just I keep saying this, but it ends up feeling a little empty. You know, that I think what God commands is what the people think they need. It's not this, I mean, I'm not saying it's not God's command, but the people needed a home. And so they understood God's commands as clearing a path of anyone else who's there.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't
Well,
but for me, it's all, even those people are God's creation.
Yeah,
although
definitely.
those people there probably would not have welcomed them in.
No,
So you kind of have to think of it that way too, you know, if you have a whole bunch of people show up and they go, hey, we came to join you. And they're going, no.
but that, they didn't do that. They didn't say came to join. They said, hey, this land is our land, get out.
Right. But if they had done it the other way, they wouldn't have welcomed them either, you know. I mean, you kind of look at it both ways too, you know.
Think about, it's like there's a block of houses. I'm just looking out my window and there's a whole block of houses. And a group of people comes up to the first house, knocks on the door and said, hey, this is our house. And the people who live there say, no, we own this house. This is our house. Said, no, our God said this is our house.
Yeah.
And if you don't give it to us, we'll kill you.
Yeah.
But we're not going to give it to you. And then they take the house by force. Well, then they go to the next house down the road, the next house down the block. Hey, this is our house too. No, this is our house. I mean, that's kind of what's happening in it. So it feels a little, I don't know.
Well, I don't think they even asked,
No.
you know, and that's just it. I mean, if they had said, you know, like I said, can we come in and move in here and join you? They'd have said, no, we don't want you. Literally, wouldn't you say that?
Which is
Right.
what we're doing to people who want to come across the borders.
Right. Mhm.
And that's where I see the conflict in my life. Because I don't want all those people here. They have their own country. You know, how do you handle that?
And a lot of those
In your
countries,
Christian life.
they legitimately fear for their lives because there's civil war being fought and
Right,
their daughters are being taken and raped. They're being killed, you know.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. We end up getting into some tough conversations. Yeah, I would say that when I always find it sort of humorous when a Christian person says we need to live biblically.
We need what?
We need to live biblically. We need to live like the people of the Bible lived, or the traditional biblical marriage, which is a really funny one. because many of them had, I mean, it was common to have multiple wives.
Sure.
Very common. Is that the traditional biblical marriage? Because there's about 100 examples of people that had multiple wives.
Mhm.
As an example, so when you say, well, this traditional biblical relationship, I'm like, so we just kill people who aren't like us?
Hmm.
Because that happens in the Bible a lot.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, but it's not telling us to do that. We're supposed to be learning from what they did and supposed to be getting smart, right?
Exactly. But there's a fine line between, we do that even with the Gospels, right? All the way through, we say, well, we're going to decide, is this text for us to model, or is it for us to see as history,
mhm,
right? And everything in the Bible is, or is it, right? So is this? I guarantee for the Jews of, maybe not, maybe by Jesus' time, they looked on this history with pride, right? That they conquered all these people, they killed them,
yeah,
right? That good, our God stood up for us and we killed all those people that weren't, that didn't, that were in our land, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah, we tend to pick and choose which parts we follow and which parts we read as history that we're not necessarily proud of,
yeah, yeah,
right? To a certain degree, which ones are going to be lessons for good lessons for us, and which ones will be what is it, the negative, which are positive reinforcement, which are negative reinforcement, which are things we learn because we don't want to have to do that, and which are things we're going to learn because that's a good idea, and
yeah,
that can change in another generation,
right.
right? Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of we're going to get in other books that have interesting stories and fun stories, but I never get too excited about, and they slaughtered them. I read the same thing like 6 times, right? He struck every person in it. He left no one remaining. He did he struck them down by the sword.
Yeah, yeah,
To me, that's not something to be proud of. But it is the history of Israel, and a lot of these history books are, I say, all of Scripture is mythological. All of it is mythological.
it's what?
The word mythological, that doesn't mean untrue.
Okay,
I have to be very, I say this, I've said this before. It doesn't mean untrue.
yeah,
It happen exactly like that. But it's
Right.
not, it's written from a certain perspective with a certain agenda,
yeah,
and meant to be a teaching and telling later generations about this.
yeah,
So we can't read anything as if there was a video camera there getting exactly what happened.
yeah,
That being said, the history books are some of the more, at least sections of the history books are some of the more likely to be pretty close to what actually happened. Just because the place names are real place names we know about, the people are real people that we know about from other sources, so we have a lot of sources to say, well, yeah, these places existed, these people existed,
yeah,
so it sort of backs up the story. Where some other places, I use the book of Esther is a really good example. Esther is the opposite, right? The people that are named in Esther, some of them existed, but they existed centuries apart from each other, and the land is sort of, so it's meant to be more of a novel, of a not so much fictional, but it's meant to pull names and places and cultures together that didn't necessarily exist together and tell this story. Whereas Joshua is probably pretty close to what actually happened.
yeah,
Esther is not likely an actual historical story. There may be elements of that are historical, but the whole thing, it was meant more to tell a moral story, right? But Joshua's probably pretty what we think of historical. I'll never call any Bible in the book truly 100% historical, even these history books.
yeah,
Partly because the idea, I mean, not even today, something that's historical is still sort of tainted by bias, right? But especially then, even in the Bible, there's bias. There's lots of bias, right? So it's hard to say purely historical, it happened exactly this way. But the history books of all the places in the Bible are probably the most clear historical, at least some of them. There's going to be a couple later on that you'll see that are a little go a little nutty. But a couple stories especially. But yeah. So, and then when I think that, then I think, oh gosh, the early Israeli people were not nice people.
Yeah,
And
I
that's just,
always think I'm glad I didn't live back then.
yeah. And that just is what it is. You know, it's nothing we can, I get a little uncomfortable with what I call chosen people language. And that happens even in the Gospels in places where we're the good guys, anyone else is bad.
Yeah.
We're God loves us and God doesn't love other people. And the nice thing about Jesus is Jesus almost always blows that up. Jesus almost always says that's not, God loves God. You know, Jesus goes to people that are not Jews. Jesus goes to people that are not, that the culture doesn't accept. But that's not the history of the people in the scripture, unfortunately, right? So we're going to hear much of the same we just heard in chapter 11, but it's okay. So we all the kings of southern Canaan were defeated. Now we're going to northern Canaan. Here we go. When King Jabin of Hazor heard of this, he sent to King Jobab of Madon, to the king of Shimron, to the king of Akshaph, to the kings who were in the northern hill country and in the Arabah south of Chinroth, and the lowland and the Naphoth door to the west, to the Canaanites in the east and the west, the Amorites and Hittites, the Perizzites and the Jebusites in the hill country, and the Hivites under Hermon in the land of Mizpah. I'm going to go again and look at my map again. And I'm assuming these are all north of Jericho and Gilgal.
Zephron, one of them?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, they're quite a bit north, actually.
Yeah, Zaphon, Shimron. Yeah, some of them pretty far north. Athak, real far north. Yeah. Just sort of carving out more space now to the north. They came out with all their troops, a great army, in number like the sand on the seashore, with very many horses and chariots. All these kings joined their forces and came and camped together at the waters of Merom to fight with Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. Tomorrow at this time I will hand over all of them slain to Israel. You shall hamstring their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So Joshua came suddenly upon them with all his fighting force by the waters of Merom and fell upon them. And the Lord handed them over to Israel, who attacked them and chased them as far as Great Sidon and Mishrepoth Maim, and eastward as far as the valley of Mizpah. They struck them down until they had no one remaining. And Joshua did to them as the Lord commanded him. He hamstrung their horses. That seems cruel. And burned their chariots with fire. Joshua turned back at that time and took Hazor and struck its king down with a sword. Before that time, Hazor was the head of all those kingdoms. And they put to the sword all who were in it, utterly destroying them. There was no one left who breathed, and he burned Hazor with fire. And all the towns of those kings and all their kings Joshua took and struck them with the edge of the sword, utterly destroying them, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. But Israel burned none of those towns that stood on the mounds except Hazor, which Joshua did burn. All the spoil of these towns and the livestock, but Israel took it for their booty. But all the people they struck down with the edge of the sword until they had destroyed them, and they did not leave any who breathed. And the Lord had commanded, as the Lord had commanded his servant Moses. So Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all the Lord had commanded Moses. So Joshua took all that land, the hill country and all the Negeb and all the land of the Goshen and the lowland and the Arabah and the hill country of Israel and its lowland, from Mount Halak, which rises towards Seir, as far as Baal Gad and the valley of Lebanon below Mount Hermon. He took all their kings, struck them down, and put them to death. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. There was not a town that made peace with the Israelites, except the Hivites, the inhabitants of Gibeon. All were taken in battle. For it was the Lord's doing to harden their hearts so that they would come against Israel in battle, in order that they might be utterly destroyed and might receive no mercy, but be exterminated. Boy, that's a tough word. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses. And at that time, Joshua came and wiped out the Anakim from the hill country, from Hebron, from Debir, from Enab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their towns. None of the Anakim was left in the land of the Israelites. Some remained only in Gaza and Gath and in Ashdod. So Joshua took the whole land according to all that Lord had spoken to Moses, and Joshua gave it for inheritance to Israel according to their tribal allotments. And the land had rest from war. I don't like that they use the word exterminated.
Yeah.
They exterminated everybody. Ooh.
They didn't leave much. Really, I don't know how they survived.
So I'm gonna do my map again. All of the red lines on my thing
Right.
are the tribes, as you can see now. So now they've extended out to there and there.
Oh,
So there's still some land to the north and the south that they haven't conquered, that they would eventually conquer, because those are lands of the tribes. But in the earlier things, they had conquered from here to there, and now they've conquered up to here. So, and this is mostly the, what is modern Israel. So there's a little bit to the south yet. Gaza, which it mentioned, is over here somewhere. So it's still a little south and west of where they've conquered. Gaza's right under my finger, right on the tip of my finger. So it's still a little south and west of where they've conquered. And they've come up to about this line here, give or take. So, and left no one alive. Multiple times it said that. I think we're going to stop there. We're going to hear a list of
The defeated kings.
all the defeated kings next week. Parts of Canaan not conquered, and then we're going to hear all of the historical, a lot of lists from here from now on, all the historical territory of the 12 tribes of Israel, which has happened then, and the towns that are in those areas. It's like 4 or 5 chapters of basically where is the territory, what cities are in those areas, and everything. So yeah, several chapters of that, but there'll be a little bit more battle, but mostly the primary part of the land of the Israelites has been conquered.
This is kind of interesting on my book. It has on that turn the page, it has some maps, and it says the Northern Campaign, which is includes Kadesh,
Yeah.
Hazor, that area. It says late Bronze Age Hazor was burned by Joshua. Excavations have revealed 3 clearly datable destruction layers, one which may provide the strongest evidence yet for a historically verifiable date for the conquest.
Wow.
The excavator thought Joshua burned the latest level, but others argue that it must actually have been the earliest of the 3, which would be 1400 BC.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
Very. Yeah. Like I said, I think unfortunately when sometimes when people do horrible things in the Bible, that's when I think it's probably most historical.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm guessing these are pretty accurate. They came in and they destroyed these different areas.
Yeah.
So they established the land, all the land there as their own. Did you notice that Gaza, what is the primary, what they call the Gaza Strip, right? It's the primary area where the Palestinians are to this day. So they've never totally conquered Gaza.
Oh.
That's a historical note, right? That to this day, that's still, there wasn't a treaty made in the 40s, and then Israel essentially has broken the treaty since and taken more and more of the land from them. But there was a treaty, and the Gaza Strip is the most intact part of that still. And Gaza is, they just mentioned in that last passage, Gaza is was one of the parts that was unconquered by them at that point.
Hmm.
That's the furthest south and west in that whole area. So, interesting to think about. They're still, in some ways, they're still fighting that battle, those battles today
Yes, yes, yes.
against the Palestinians. So, yep. Well, I'm going to end the recording.